Hi, my name is Gabriella. I am registered with the Cherokee Nation Wild Potato Clan, and I am also a Cattle and Seminole as well. Today my topic is going to be on the North Dakota Access Pipeline, and I'll be referring to it as DAPL in this speech. Since 2014, under President Barack Obama, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe has been desperately fighting against the Black Snake, otherwise known as the North Dakota Access Pipeline. This pipeline was scheduled to be built in 2016. Gathering research from the Times, the pipeline is designed to transport 570,000 barrels of crude oil daily from the North Dakota to Illinois. The pipeline would travel underneath the Missouri River, the primary drinking source for the Sioux tribe. In 2017, President Trump decided to move forward with the project. Thousands of people coming from all tribes gathered in North Dakota to fight off the 1,200-mile project despite the harsh conditions of the Dakota winter. This situation escalated so dramatically that the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues has sent human rights observers to investigate alleged intimidation tactics and harsh and humiliating treatment by the law enforcement at Standing Rock. My major claim is that the North Dakota Access Pipeline has a significant negative effect on the local Native population. I will be discussing 3 key points that support my major claim. First, DAPL poses as a major threat to the environment. Second, DAPL will harm the relationship between the tribes and government entities as a result of transgression of Native American values. And lastly, that DAPL will violate treaty rights. Referring back to my first point, DAPL poses a major threat to the environment. Gathering research from National Geographic, they mentioned that it could endanger many animals and their habitats in the U.S. and Canada through the infrastructure's construction. There are 9 threatened, endangered, and candidate species in the area that the Dakota Access Pipeline would run through, according to an environmental assessment by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. National Geographic also mentions that it will increase reliance on and use of fossil fuels and further delay investment in more renewable technologies. Extracting oil from the tar sands generates more greenhouse gases than extracting oil through more conventional methods, and therefore contributes to a greater amount of greenhouse gas emissions over time. National Geographic also mentions that the threat of an oil spill and poisoned water sources are high. The company behind the Keystone XL pipeline has agreed to change its planned pipeline route to go around the environmentally sensitive sandhills of Nebraska and bury the pipeline deeper in the ground than they had planned and closely monitor the pipeline's safety. These steps are intended to help minimize the harm of an oil spill if one happens, but it's still very clear that it's a possibility. My second point is that DAPL will harm the relationship between the tribes of government entities as a result of a transgression of Native American values. The digging up of ancient burial grounds. Many tribe members are also concerned about the burial grounds being disturbed during construction of the pipeline. Bulldozers have already removed some topsoil on ground that the tribe considers sacred. Water is sacred to the Sioux tribe. Stephanie Tomhave from Sherman Indian High School and a close family friend, she's of the Dakota tribe, which is neighboring with the Sioux tribe, explained to me that water is life. You absolutely cannot live without water, and it is considered Mother Earth's bloodline. The pipeline goes through the Standing Rock Reservation. Taking information from an article written by Lauren Kimmel, author of MJIL, she states that over 380 sites would potentially be destroyed by the DAPL project, despite the numerous federal laws and policies concerning such sacred historical and archaeological sites. On to my third point, the DAPL will violate treaty rights. Again, taking information from the article written by Lauren Kimmel, the Treaty of Fort Laramie of April 29, 1868 is violated. Representatives of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe argue that the pipeline's construction continues a direct violation of the treaty, also known as the Sioux Treaty, which serves in part to delineate land rights between the U.S. government and the many different bands of the Great Sioux Nation. The treaty directly states that the United States agrees that the geographic location known as the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation shall be set apart for the absolute and undisturbed use and occupation of the Indians. The treaty states the tribe's right to exclusive use and enjoyment of the land, thus triggering a treaty violation. In conclusion, since the beginning of this nation, my people have been fighting to keep what little of what we have. We continue to be pushed around by the government. The Native American community wants our voices to be heard. We will not be silent anymore. I stand with Standing Rock Tribe. Thank you.
All right, proposition's clear, contents are previewed, the controversy is laid out pretty well, we know what's going on. There are a couple of things in the body of the speech that are a little bit confusing. For example, on one point you mentioned that the Keystone Pipeline in Nebraska has made concessions to address these things. I'm not sure if this is a if this is an example that you're making comparison to, that they are doing that someplace else and that sort of concession needed to be made in these circumstances also, or if the argument is that, well, otherwise I really don't know what the argument is. It's not the same pipeline, is it? If it's not the same pipeline, then I'm not exactly sure how it applies other than in that instance, and that needed to be a little bit clearer. The first point on the environmental impact, the species being threatened, that the species live in the area, I think that's documented pretty well. That they're threatened by the development of the project, I think that's a little bit less certain. The environmental impact that you have basically is an argument against fossil fuels, not against this particular product or, this particular project. It's a more generic argument against fossil fuels, so I don't really feel like that fits this particular argument. You have a point later on where you're talking about water, and you've got to have a quote there that talk about water is life. And there's not an explanation about how this pipeline threatens the water. That should be part of your argument. You kind of suggest that it's goes close to the Missouri River or under the Missouri River. And so why is it a threat to the Missouri River? What is the consequence that happens here? Is it not deep enough? Is it likely to break? Is it likely to have some contamination? Is it the building of the process? That's a little bit vague. So I didn't really think that you got the impact out of that it was set up to get at the beginning of the presentation. To me, the argument that seems the most strong and best documented is the last point about treaty violations. You quote the treaty directly. You have some examples of some of the things that have already been done that seem to violate the treaty. I'm not exactly sure how what the governing bodies in this situation are, whether there is a tribal government that addresses these issues, whether there's a relationship between the Bureau of Indian Affairs or the Bureau of Land Management and the Department of Agriculture that addresses those kinds of issues. It's ambiguous, but it certainly feels like you've got good arguments on that point that suggest that it violates elements of the treaty, and as long as that treaty is still standing and we're supposed to be guided by it, that's a particular problem. The presentation is reasonably good, although I do think you're reading a little bit more than you want to. And one of the things that makes it feel a little bit more like reading is at the end you have a more passionate way of expressing yourself on this issue that feels kind of different from the way you were talking earlier in the speech. And so if they were more consistent, I think that would probably come across as a little bit more credible then. All right, thank you.